A single painting sold for $43 million at a New York auction house in 2011, authenticated by the world's leading experts, displayed in museums across 3 continents. But the canvas was created not in a Renaissance workshop 5 centuries ago, but in a cramped garage in Queens, mixed from hardware store pigments and aged with a vacuum cleaner and a blowtorch. How does a forgery fool the entire art world? And who are the invisible craftsmen rewriting history one brushstroke at a time? Art forgery is not a modern crime. For as long as collectors have paid premiums for famous names, forgers have supplied the demand. But between 2008 and 2019, a series of interconnected scandals revealed something unprecedented. Not isolated con artists working alone, but coordinated networks spanning 4 continents, supplying fraudulent works to the world's most prestigious galleries, auction houses, and private collections. These weren't crude copies spotted immediately under ultraviolet light. These were chemically perfect, historically plausible fabrications that passed carbon dating, infrared spectroscopy, and the scrutiny of PhDs who had spent lifetimes studying single artists. The global art market, valued at $65 billion annually, discovered it had been systematically infiltrated. And the forgers themselves remained, for years, almost completely anonymous. The story begins not with a painting, but with a collapse. In September 2008, Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy, and the global financial crisis sent shockwaves through every luxury market. Art prices plummeted, but a curious thing happened in the market for old masters and historical works. Suddenly, previously unknown paintings by Rembrandt, Caravaggio, and Vermeer began surfacing through dealers in New York, London, and Hong Kong. A German art dealer named Wolfgang Beltracchi had been operating since the 1990s, but investigators would later discover his operation expanded dramatically after 2008. Beltracchi didn't forge signatures on existing paintings. He invented entirely new works, complete with fabricated provenance, false exhibition histories, and backdated photographs showing the paintings hanging in pre-war European collections. He studied the chemical composition of historical pigments, sourced canvases from the correct time periods by buying worthless old paintings at flea markets, and mixed his own paints using recipes that would pass laboratory analysis. Between 2004 and 2010, his work sold for an estimated $45 million through major auction houses and galleries. The paintings hung in respected institutions. Critics praised their artistic merit in published journals. Insurance companies paid premiums on fraudulent valuations. Beltracchi was arrested in August 2010 after a painting supposedly created in 1914 was found to contain titanium white, a pigment not commercially available until 1916. But his operation was just one node in a larger web. Parallel investigations uncovered connected networks in the United States, China, and the United Kingdom. In New York, the Knoedler Gallery, which had operated for 165 years and was one of America's oldest art dealers, shuttered suddenly in 2011. Internal investigations revealed the gallery had sold over $60 million worth of forged abstract expressionist paintings between 1994 and 2009. Works supposedly by Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, and Willem de Kooning. The paintings had been supplied by a single source, a woman named Glafira Rosales, who claimed they came from an anonymous European collector. Rosales obtained the paintings from an artist named Pei-Shen, working from a studio in Queens. Chen was trained in traditional Chinese painting techniques but had studied Western modernism. He could replicate Rothko's color fields and Pollock's drip technique with such precision that the forgeries passed examination by expert authenticators and scientific testing. The scheme unraveled only when multiple buyers, comparing notes privately after the 2008 crash, noticed improbable similarities in provenance stories. In parallel, authorities in Spain arrested José Bernat in 2010 for supplying forged works to auction houses across Europe. Investigators discovered Bernat was not working alone but coordinating with restorers, framers, and document forgers who could create convincing paper trails. Old exhibition catalogs were reprinted with subtle additions. False customs documents were aged artificially. Even the wood backing of frames was sourced from demolished buildings of the correct historical period. The Chinese connection deepened in 2013 when a workshop in Shenzhen was raided, revealing an industrial-scale forgery operation. Workers were producing hundreds of copies simultaneously, not crude tourist reproductions but museum-quality forgeries of Impressionist and post-Impressionist works. These weren't being sold as originals in China, but were entering the Western market through a network of intermediaries who added false authentication papers and invented backstories. By 2015, Interpol's Works of Art unit estimated that approximately 40% of works in circulation attributed to certain high-value artists might be forgeries. The true scale remains unknown because many collectors and institutions, upon discovering they own forgeries, choose private settlements over public disclosure to avoid reputational damage and loss of value in their remaining collections. Interpol's reports painted a disturbing picture. The global trade in forged art was no longer a matter of individual deception but a structured industry, exploiting the gaps between art, science, and finance. Investigators noted the same forged pigments appearing in works supposedly painted centuries apart, suggesting shared material suppliers or training among the forgers. Modern authentication depends on three pillars: provenance, connoisseurship, and scientific testing. Provenance can be fabricated with convincing documents. Connoisseurship can be fooled by emotional bias or by works intentionally designed to align with an expert's published theories. And even scientific testing, once considered infallible, can be deceived if the forger understands the parameters being measured. In one infamous case, a forger acquired dust from the floor of a restoration studio that had handled authentic Renaissance works. By mixing that dust into his new pigments, he contaminated laboratory samples with genuine historical residues. Carbon dating placed the paintings perfectly within the expected period. For years, experts cited these results as confirmation of authenticity. Auction houses often avoid deep forensic testing before sales. Scientific analysis costs thousands of dollars per work, and the market rewards speed and spectacle. The result is a system built on trust and plausible deniability. When a forgery is exposed, the blame rarely lands on the auctioneer or the authenticator but on a distant intermediary who can quietly disappear. The majority of forged masterpieces never hang in public museums. They remain locked in temperature-controlled storage, collateral for loans, or trophies for collectors who prefer secrecy over scrutiny. For some, the thrill of ownership outweighs the risk of deception. The art itself becomes secondary. What matters is the illusion of rarity. Forgers themselves often view their craft not as crime but as commentary. Wolfgang Beltracchi once claimed he painted the missing links in art history, works that could have existed but never did. Pei-Shen, interviewed after fleeing to China, said he brought beauty into the world, and that collectors got what they paid for, a painting they loved. Between defiance and guilt lies the gray zone where art, money, and morality intersect. Psychologists studying convicted forgers found recurring traits: obsessive attention to detail, deep admiration for their chosen masters, and resentment toward a system that rewards branding over skill. Many describe a moment of exhilaration when experts first praise their work, followed by dread as the lie grows uncontrollable. As law enforcement agencies began to cooperate internationally, they discovered how digital tools both aided and exposed the forgers. High-resolution images allowed study of brushstroke rhythms once hidden by varnish. Databases cross-referenced pigments, fibers, and stylistic features. Yet even with these advances, prosecutions remained rare. Evidence chains broke easily when transactions crossed borders or when dealers claimed ignorance. In courtroom after courtroom, the question became not merely who forged the art but who chose to believe it. Jurors heard testimonies from experts who once authenticated the same works they now condemned. Collectors testified about humiliation and financial ruin. Behind every forged painting stood a pyramid of complicity. Artists, dealers, scientists, insurers, each benefiting, in some way, from the illusion. By 2019, dozens of institutions quietly reviewed their collections. Some paintings were removed without announcement, replaced with discreet plaques reading, "attributed to." Others remained on walls, their authenticity suspended in uncertainty. The art world had entered an era where truth itself became negotiable. a masterpiece's value determined not by what it is, but by who dares to question it. While police raids and lawsuits made headlines, many forgers simply vanished. Some continued their work under new aliases. Others shifted to digital reproduction, selling ultra-realistic archival recreations legally, indistinguishable from originals except for microscopic markers. The boundary between forgery and homage blurred even further. Technology that once promised to end forgery has, paradoxically, given it new life. Artificial intelligence can now generate paintings in the style of any artist, extrapolating brushwork patterns from limited samples. These outputs, when printed on aged canvas and coated with handmade varnish, fool not only the eye but machine learning detection systems trained on the same datasets. In 2024, a scandal emerged involving AI-assisted forgeries of lesser-known impressionists sold through online auctions. The creators had fed tens of thousands of public domain images into a generative model, fine-tuned to mimic color absorption patterns of 19th-century oil paint. Each resulting image was printed using pigment-based inks, then subtly distressed. The works passed digital verification tests because the system itself could not differentiate between its own output and genuine human creation. The art market adapted rather than resisted. Collectors began buying AI originals, verified digital forgeries sold openly as conceptual art. Auction houses rebranded machine-generated works as neo-authentic, complete with blockchain certificates. The same systems designed to preserve truth now facilitated its reinvention. Blockchain was introduced as the final safeguard of authenticity, yet its integrity depends entirely on the accuracy of the first record. If a forgery is registered as authentic at the outset, every subsequent transaction is validated by that same lie. A perfect digital chain, anchored to a false beginning. Philosophers and curators began asking whether authenticity itself still mattered. If a forged painting evokes the same emotion, displays identical craftsmanship, and fools even the experts, does it lose its value solely because of its origin? Or does the value of art lie not in who painted it, but in the story society chooses to believe? Some museums started hosting forgery exhibitions, displaying authentic and fake works together without labels, inviting visitors to guess. Attendance surged. People lingered longer before each painting, debating brushwork and texture. For the first time, deception became a form of participation, the viewer complicit in the game. Private collectors, however, remained divided. Some quietly removed suspicious works from storage, hiring independent labs for testing. Others refused to know, preferring blissful ignorance over confrontation. The illusion, after all, protects both pride and investment. In interviews with imprisoned forgers, a recurring sentiment emerges. They never intended to destroy the art world, only to expose its hypocrisy. The system, they argue, values signatures over skill, marketing over mastery. By feeding that hunger for prestige, they merely held up a mirror. And as the camera drifts back through museum halls and private galleries, the question remains, how much of what we call art history is real, and how much is the result of invisible hands, rewriting the past with perfect precision? For every masterpiece we admire, there may exist another, hanging in some quiet room, identical in every way except for the truth of who made it. When questioned, many forgers describe their moment of exposure not as fear, but relief. The lie had grown too large to manage. Some had watched their works enter museums under false names, receiving glowing reviews from critics they once admired. The applause, meant for someone else, became unbearable. The media framed them as villains or tricksters, depending on the narrative. Documentaries portrayed Beltracchi as a genius rebel against elitism, while others painted him as a con artist who undermined cultural heritage. The truth, as always, lay somewhere between admiration and condemnation. In the aftermath of these scandals, restoration studios faced new scrutiny. Every cleaning, every pigment analysis, every infrared scan carried the possibility of revealing another hidden deception. Laboratories reported a rise in private requests for re-authentication, silent confessions wrapped in scientific procedure. Interpol's Works of Art division continued tracing the financial trails, offshore accounts, shell companies, and tax shelters where forged paintings were used as instruments of money laundering. A fake masterpiece could cross borders more easily than cash, its value fluctuating with rumor and secrecy. The billionaires who once prided themselves on exclusive collections began shifting toward new markets: NFTs, digital art, and algorithmic installations. Not because they were safer, but because they offered plausible novelty, a fresh illusion untainted by centuries of deceit. The cycle simply migrated from canvas to code. In a sleek exhibition in Tokyo, visitors stand before projections of AI-generated Rembrandts and Van Goghs, each labeled as reimagined by machine. The crowd doesn't mind the admission. The glow of authenticity now comes not from the artist's hand, but from the experience itself, curated, immersive, ephemeral. Somewhere, in a quiet studio, another hand dips a brush into aged pigment, perhaps out of nostalgia or defiance or love of the craft itself. Forgery, in its most paradoxical form, becomes preservation, a way of keeping lost styles alive in an age that prizes novelty over patience. Across the world's vaults and galleries, millions of artworks remain unseen, authenticated or not. Curators whisper of paintings that no one dares to test. To unmask them would be to dismantle fortunes, reputations, and legacies built over generations. Silence, in many cases, is the final act of preservation. As dawn light filters through glass skylights of the Louvre, the Uffizi, and the Met, the camera glides past masterpieces, each one a question mark. The line between truth and imitation fades. What remains is the awe these images still inspire, regardless of authorship. In the end, the global ring of art forgers isn't just a network of criminals. It's a mirror held up to human desire, a testament to our willingness to believe beauty, even when it's built on deception. Because in the art world, as in life, sometimes the most convincing forgeries are the ones we want to be true.